Welcome to the API Specification Toolbox. Let me load up my page before I get talking too much here. Nope, it's Toolbox, here we are. So this is the API Specification Toolbox. I gather every Friday. Fridays have become my API Specifications Day. It's where I do most of my OpenAPI work. And increasingly async API, JSON schema, and other things. It's all managed at API Specification Toolbox as the org, and we have this home repo where we kind of drive the conversation. We have everyone submits issues. We kind of submit issues for many of the ideas and different things we could work on, and then we work to kind of label things and organize them and figure out how we can move some projects forward. And so with that said, other than that, it's pretty informal. I would say the goal is this is the anchor of my Friday for API specification conversations. And because I have like the OAI marketing meeting at 10:30, I have async calls today. I have actually my 7 a.m. has become open referral, which is the 211 standard for the cities. So basically Fridays become my API spec days, and I started this around, it was called OpenAPI Demand Gen. We widened it to be about all of the specs, and I kind of outlined that here where we're focusing on OpenAPI, async JSON schema, Postman collections, APIs JSON, RAML, OpenID, OAuth. I'm doing some plotting and scheming with OpenID right now, and then out of the discussions, we've identified the need to really be focusing on specific sectors, and of course PSD2, FHIR, doing a lot of work right now with open travel, financial data exchange, open insurance. So we're trying to organize a lot of these here. And then, as I said, I record these and then post them to YouTube for the discussions. But with that said, that's kind of the formalities. I didn't actually pull together an agenda because it was kind of a interesting news week in the U.S. this week, and I was a little bit distracted. So, but there's lots of things to talk about. The fact that I didn't pull together an agenda shouldn't hurt that. Let me kind of just pull together my notepad here on the side, and you guys get a look at all my little notes. But a couple things that I wanted to talk about today. One, I am now the co-chair for the OAI DGB with Isabel Mani, my friend from 42 Crunch. So I don't really understand fully what that means yet, but we are both the co-chairs, and we'll go into our first governing group meeting next week, and we'll talk about learn the ropes and what happens. But really, we ran unopposed, so like no one else stepped up is the only reason why we won. So that's pretty cool. So I'm but really the platform that Isabel and I put out was one, I didn't want to run for the role by myself. She didn't want to run for it by herself. So we were both like, hey, we could do it together and support each other and be okay. But two, we really want to run on a platform that we want to figure out how to move the OAI out of what we consider a defensive stance, meaning, hey, let's just defend the spec from the people who want to control it, whether that's control the direction of it or slow it down or whatever the reasonings might be, and really make it a more outward focusing spec. And that involves building relationships with the tooling providers, which the OAI has been fairly against. It started with Tony Tam's perspective that the OAI should be about the spec and it shouldn't be about the tooling. Not that we're going to go all in on supporting tooling, but I feel pretty strongly, and I think Mike might feel similarly, that the tooling is a pretty critical piece of the conversation, and whether the OAI fully supports, invests, and owns tools remains to be seen, and should be a community driven decision. But at the very least, we should have stronger feedback loops and relationships with the people who build tools. I think there should be more feedback into the spec and into the org. And so that's one of the main tenets that we're working on, is we want to have an outward focus to tooling providers. The second is multi-spec. I really want to continue and drive conversations, and we're doing that here in Q1 with Fron and Async API to try to convince Fron that maybe OAI could be a home for Async API. Also with Ben and the JSON schema community to try to convince them that the OAI might be a place. I don't know if we're going to win these arguments, and even if the OAI is the proper home for those two specs, but I want to have them. And then secondarily have conversations with the people who are proposing overlays or extensions that are currently on the table. So OpenAPI for SLA out of where are they at? They're in Spain. And then Isabel has some security. They've been pushing on some security discussions. We're going to revisit those and try to move those forward. And then the business sector multi-specs. So really trying to invest and build relationships around getting open travel is kind of the tip of that. Fast healthcare, getting more fire representation and relationships working. I'm working on the city front 211 and 311 standards. So really trying to get the OAI being more outward focused on that. So there's some other agenda items, or kind of platform bullet points, but those are the top ones. And I'll kind of pause there because kind of part of this meeting, I want to open it up to y'all and see what you all are working on, and before I dive into any other topics. Anything you guys want to add? Any discussions? No? So I just want to pick, because this ends up being just a conversation between most folks. So anyways, Mark and I always, when we jump on, we always have a whole list of laundry list of things, and we should probably keep layering them into this meeting, Mark, and or Fridays, just in general, because I would invite some of the topics you and I are talking about when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the European Commission stuff. I'm going to be weaving in my UN related environmental program work here. But really Friday for me, I'm trying to stack this based upon all the open specifications. So I think Isabel and I are going to start doing a security session probably at some point, like 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. Pacific Coast time, or maybe a little earlier, actually maybe 6 a.m. Pacific Coast, to try to cater to the European audience a little bit more. I do open referral and open 311 at 7 a.m. I do this at 8 a.m. So I'm going to just keep stacking. So Mark, if you or Mike or Frank, if you guys have something, let's keep kind of queuing up dedicated time on Fridays. Another thing that's not widely publicized right now, but this is recorded, so it'll get out a little bit, is my role at Postman is shifting. I'm going to be leading up our open program. I'm still the chief evangelist is my role, but I've been in DevRel marketing to date. Now, as of this week, I'm going to be forming my own team around open source, open specifications, open data, and really trying to basically everything we do here. So while it'll still remain that Friday is kind of my specifications day, my entire week's going to widen to be able to focus in this area. It makes me happy. So I'll leave that there. More details to come on that front. So beyond that, I got more stuff, but I kind of wanted to hear what Mike's up to these days. What are you up to, Mike? What's shaking and cooking?
Hi everybody. We're getting very, very close on OpenAPI 3.1, which is fantastic. The last few little PRs, hopefully, are trickling in. and we're building on the JSON schema 2020-12 draft that was published at the end of the year. So that's the next thing that, with my OpenAPI TSC hat on, that I'm mostly focused on.
Nice.
I really hope we can get that out maybe by the end of the month. You know, I think that's realistic. And people are back from the holidays and they're paying attention again, and we can get some blog postings out there, get the getting started guide publicized, and get people looking at that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to get some eyeballs on that this month. That's one of the things I want to do as part of this group, but also as OAI chair role, is how do we drum more attention for each release and get more feedback and eyeballs on things, so that you guys are not just the sole person, people driving things forward. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think we need to build, like you say, those feedback loops from the tooling vendors, but also from the OAI members themselves. It would be great to hear from the people who are out there using the specification, building the tools, building the gateways, writing their own specification, OS documents, and we need that consistency in the developer community. I think we get a lot of people pop up with their pain points, and they say, this is my issue, and we might get a few people say, yes, that's important to me as well. That's great. But the real consistency of storytelling about what people's direction is for the OAS, what they see as the next important things to fold into 3.2. It'd be fantastic to have better feedback loops in all of those areas. Yeah,
it's top of mind for me to reach out to the members. I did a round of reaching out to all the members before I had applied for this to be the OAI co-chair, because I was politicking. I was actually preparing that we were going to have a vote, and I needed it. But it was also part of just me wanting to drive. I really feel like, as a member, you join the OAI, and then that's about it. That's about all that happens. So I want to try to figure out how to do more. So
yeah, from the technical steering committee point of view, that's often what we saw. That very occasionally we get a representative from one of the more headline members, and they'd be around for a few meetings, or they'd post a few issues or a couple of PRs. But getting that regular interaction building up with someone who can be the real champion within their organization, in all of their connections with the OAI, technical and commercial, I think that's really important.
You touched on, I would say, which is kind of a couple of the other platform items that Isabel and I are focused on, is one, member outreach, preventing member churn, and bringing in new members. But more importantly, I think you used the word champion, is how do we build the next generation of OAI, OAS champions? And I would say API spec champions, because I really don't think it should just be focused. And, as I did the politicking around to all the, I won't name names, but the old guard, we all, of the OAI, and said, hey, who's applying to be the chair role? And everyone's like, I would be very interested, but I just don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I'm kind of burnt out, or I've got these other obligations. I can't. And so the critical nature of finding the next generation champions is front and center, I would say. So getting folks, hey Sean, is getting new blood to the table and figuring out how to get them involved, and then get them involved in a way that's not going to burn them out is top of mind. So
absolutely, and getting a more diverse selection of voices, both technically diverse and diverse in all senses of the word. Getting all those voices heard, getting voices amplified where necessary. I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
I think getting the vendors to, let's say, consume or offer the latest specs to the regular consumers is very important. Like if I look at it from an enterprise perspective, where I'll be trying to evangelize and push the latest version of the spec as far as I can, but we're a big finance enterprise, so we will want to use our X-Way API management or our Azure API management, and we won't want to go outside of those avenues with regard to publishing APIs to our consumers. So then we're dependent upon the vendors also, staying pretty much with the curve with regard to how specs are being rolled out. Otherwise, we're a further iteration or two behind the curve.
Well, and that's an important point I think came up in, as part of this API spec toolbox work. I had for a while a dedicated conversation on Fridays about how do we move people from Swagger to OpenAPI, and really focusing on just the individuals. How do we get consumers, people who are saying Swagger on Twitter, to know that they mean OpenAPI. But in doing that work, all roads lead to what you just said, Frank. Is it's up to the service providers to really help lead this. And what is the thing that causes Axway to move from 2.0 to 3.0, as well as get involved in 3.1 and 3.2 and and onward. So that's a big challenge. I would say I'm still working on what the argument is from 2.0 to 3.0 in general, but then what is the argument for an actual service provider as well? It's pretty critical. It's pretty tough. So yeah, so one of the things, I didn't want to go into all the details of because it's not just part of the co-chair role. There's another effort to get dedicated resources. So what is it? It's a document called, let me read the actual. So additional leadership capacity proposal. Steve Wilmot, myself, Daryl, and Marsh, and a few others pulled it together. We got Jerome, Isabel, Emmanuel, all signing on that we want to hire 3 to 5 people in a part-time capacity to help move some of these balls forward in some of these conversations. And we've got a lot of, I would say the reason why Axway, Apogee, some of these are not as far along in their support is because there's this firewall between the OAI and service providers. It's made very clear to you when you join as a service provider that you leave your company hat off when you're talking OAI for good reasons, and I think there's a lot of good reasons in there. But my personal opinion, and I've raised red flags about it quite often, is yes, we need to prevent people from pitching their products, pushing their products, and just being about their commercial providers. But we need to give the freedom for us to, as service providers, to discuss how much of the spec we support, how we support it, why we don't support references, why we don't things. There's a lot of Postman related issues to the spec that if I'm unable to talk about Postman in meetings, that I then have to leave all of these conversations behind. And so this is one of the areas I want to be a lightning rod for when it comes to discussions. How do we make sure that we can have more of these discussions with service providers? And it's tough. Hey, Mark. So Mark and I have been talking a lot. So Mark and I talk about COVID related, we talk about city related, government, healthcare, banking. That's the kind of Venn diagram. So what can we start doing on Fridays here for regular momentum for this meeting, but also can we get some other that are dedicated to, I want to do a city related one just from the standpoint of COVID in this current state we're in. I want to keep pushing forward open referral and open 311 conversations. The healthcare one is a super critical, also because the transportation folks, so Open Travel, Jeff, who some of you might know from the OAI, but Jeff runs Open Travel. We're pushing forward conversations with airlines to discuss API standards. And one of the constant veins is a fire API, a healthcare API for travel, so that you can someone that's had a COVID test can actually travel or stay in your hotel. And so I would invite you. What are some suggestions or thoughts on more formalizing discussions in some of these areas here as part of this meeting or Friday in general? Can we start doing something more formal? Are you game? What do you think?
Absolutely, game. That's why I came along today. Actually, I had a couple of things in mind. So my work for everyone else. So my work in the background in the past has been like API industry analysis and all of that sort of thing. API strategy. I've done some work with European Commission on building a API framework for digital government, where we talk about Open API standard being one of the tools that governments can use to sort of speed up API implementations by using the standards that are available. My work then has sort of shifted. So what I do now is I've got a team and we measure the value of open ecosystems. So we look at, so for example, our most advanced work is around open banking and open finance. And we look at all of the players who are opening APIs in that ecosystem, who's using them, how they're building products, who's getting to use the products that they're building. And so it's sort of like, so it maps out. And one of the key indicators, or one of the key measures that we use, is who's using OAS in that ecosystem. So it was interesting to hear what Mike was saying earlier, because at the moment it's a ticker box around which API providers are using OAS in the open banking and open finance ecosystem. But we should really be doing who's using version 1, who's using version 2. So, because then that might actually help what Frank was saying as well. If we can show to the vendors that actually the bulk of open API standards users are already at version 2, so they're ready for to move up to version 3, so therefore vendors need to align their tooling. You know, maybe there's some stuff there around demonstrating demonstrating where the ecosystem is at. Maybe that'll help with some identifying which members to reach out to, that sort of stuff. So, I mean, I'd love to do stuff where my interest in the open banking in particular is the idea of open banking should be that it's enabling financial health for small businesses, for people who've previously been locked out of banking, not traditional banking systems. So are we able to see that that's changing with open API, with an open API ecosystem? And then is the use of OAS helping to facilitate faster, viable new businesses that are then offering that range of that wider range of products to people and to small businesses as a result of using the APIs? And can you even compare the ones who are using Open API standard and how fast they're developing products and building out their user base versus those who aren't using API standards? You know, would be a great sort of comparison. So we've got that in open banking, open finance, but we've also been doing it around secondary use of health data. So for all of so using like FHIR, the electronic health records, to be able to open up new health startups and personalized medicine opportunities, all of that sort of thing. So we're sort of like tracking that out. But then I came along to join in because OAS is sort of, so the way we see value flowing in an ecosystem is you've got regulators insisting that banks or healthcare open APIs as a way of widening the players in the market, if you like. But then you've sort of got like this filtering layer as far as how value flows then from, say, a bank to fintech, and the use of standards and the developer experience and the security will either speed up the value flow or it will slow down the value flow, is our opinion. So standards and open API standard in particular is an enabler that will help create those value flows through the ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm keen to sort of, test this out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you touched on a couple things why we want to have a dedicated security kind of discussion. I do want to bring in. I'm working with Don from he started OpenID, and working with Dave from API Metrics on this is trying to pull together a governance group in 2021 that starts. I wouldn't say they're looking at equitable value exchange like Platformable's looking at, but is trying to govern. I think come up with the set of rules for how do people put forth an OpenAPI in a known location, and then that OpenAPI has monitoring data and security scans, and it's been the culmination of I would say I think I've showed in some of these meetings before, how you can have an API, but then you have to have that monitoring data and that status saying it's up or down. You have to have, what is the auth that allows me to get access to that? What is the onboarding and sign up and developer experiences you mentioned, Mark? How do you get on board? And because we all know, like, a lot of these companies go, hey, we have an API, but you can't actually find up-to-date documentation. You can't actually onboard it. You can't actually get a key. And then even if you can, it's not always up and available for you to use. And so we're going to probably start a dedicated session on Fridays to talk just security or just onboarding and access as well. So
we've got data that connects the two, so we can show OAS. So we can show, are you using OAS? And amongst those using OAS, who has a developer portal, who has tutorials, all of that sort of thing. And then for the security, it's like, who's using OAS? What other are they using MTLS? Are they using MTLS? Mm-hmm. And a whole range of other. We've got a whole range of other security technologies we're mapping, so you can do the cross tabulation of, like, what are the most popular ones that are being used alongside OAS. What's the most popular authentication that's being used with OAS? So we can do that for banks and government at the moment.
Yeah, so everybody else on the call here, Mark and I have been talking about this for years, but coming to a head here as we find time to talk is he's doing it for healthcare and government banking, but we want to try to create this as a blueprint that then other industries can go, oh, hey, let's do this for our industry, and we can start doing it for insurance, and start doing it for other leading industries, and they can self-measure, self-regulate, but then hopefully we start getting more formal and about how it's measured and reported upon. And I would say we need that. That's kind of backpedaling to what we were talking about as far as just the spec in general, is how do we get service providers to self-report on how much of the OpenAPI spec we support in a similar fashion. It's not that we just, hey, we have an OpenAPI as a service provider, we support X percentage of the OpenAPI spec, here's what we do. And I know Mike has had thoughts and conversations on this, but trying to come up with a metric or a framework and a scaffolding. And I'm trying to do this for Postman. Postman's willing to kind of put it out there and go, hey, we support 65% of OpenAPI 3.1. Here's how we, in the tool, and we don't support remote references. We don't support, and being able to outline what we don't do, and then try to map that to our roadmap. And I feel like, from a OAI perspective, that this would set some sort of competitive tone in the space where now Stoplight's gonna really push their support of OAS in a good way. This is a good competitive thing. I know Phil and Mark and them, they would increase, try to stay ahead of where Postman is. That's our competitive. How do we get that between Apogee, Mashery, does Mashery even exist anymore? Why do I keep saying that? Apogee, Axway, AWS Gateway, Azure API, and then how do we get it within industries, trickle down to within industries that people are saying, hey, we support OpenAPI, and then this goes back to my original or API's JSON argument, which is well, how do we not just support OpenAPI and X amount of the OpenAPI spec? How do we support a standardized onboarding process, standardized authentication, security, uptime and availability, all the developer experience stuff that Mark's talking about. So yeah, lots of good stuff to think about. Lots of fun.
Can I ask? Because I was going to ask Mike and Frank. You were both talking earlier about Mike, you were mentioning storytelling, but that whole idea of and Frank, you were talking about the service provider and like advocating to service providers about the need for integrating with the latest version of OAS. Are there any compelling? What are the compelling stories that you see work? Do you have any examples, or is there anything in particular? I'm thinking from my perspective, if I'm collecting data, is there any key data points that are useful, or any sort of key stories around how OAS has created value for the business or for whoever, or for the vendor or whatever, that then helps them move the needle on wanting to update to the latest version?
Well, we've got sort of half a dozen sort of new features in 3.1, roughly. Some are on the technical kind of underpinnings of the specification, like we're moving to the latest draft of JSON schema, and we're fully compatible with that draft now. We're not a limited subset, superset, side set compromise anymore. It's just pure JSON schema and a couple of the keywords that we use for XML and for discriminator. So that's one that can help people build tooling, because they can, once the JSON schema tooling catches up with the latest draft, and there will be a bit of a lag there, the OpenAPI tooling can then use standard JSON schema tools, the standard validators, the standard code generating tools. That should even out the playing field a little bit in terms of people using those standard building blocks, but also give people more opportunities to differentiate their products and say, our code generator is best in class, or our validator is the fastest out there for your gateway, or whatever they want to sort of differentiate themselves on. Like you mentioned, mutual TLS. That's something that's been added in 3.1. It's kind of slightly embryonic. It just says yes, we use MTLS, and we hope that's enough for people to say that in their OAS documents, and that's enough.
That's a signal, though. They're saying it's enough. It's a starting point. So
yeah, exactly. Hopefully, we can build on that in 3.2 if we've missed anything key. We've got webhooks that are defined out of band, can now be represented in an OAS document, which is something Lorna from Nexmo was working on. That fills in a gap where we could only support callbacks if the webhook was registered by an API call. If you set up your webhooks like you do in GitHub, for instance, you set up manually with a GUI. Anything that's registered out of band, we can now represent those in an OpenAPI document as well. So that's a nice feature. I should have the release notes in front of me. That would be really helpful. But there's two or three more things that we've got into 3.1. Overlays are a slightly different kettle of fish. That it's a separate specification document, because it could apply to async API as well as it could apply to OpenAPI. We haven't quite got the overlays finished because we don't want to split our limited time trying to get both documents out at exactly the same time.
So So what is
Yeah.
what's the state of the overlays in general? Is Daryl's last document the most current up to date vision of that, or is there another?
I think there's a PR on that document to get it up to date. I think Daryl's quite keen to look at whether we should be using JSON path, because that seems to have been revived as an RFC now, or an internet draft. So that's something you can cite, and of course Spectral from Stoplight uses JSON path.
Yeah.
We were thinking of using James path in overlays, which is a slightly less commonly used technology, but it has some advantages in terms of security, and the behavior of the implementations is much better defined. But if this revised version of JSON path does go through the IETF process and become an RFC, then obviously that would probably be a good basis for the overlays. So that question has kind of held up publishing that document a little bit.
So I'm hearing, there's two sides to storytelling. Is one, I think we need better OAI storytelling around each of these areas, why they matter, help amplify the work that the TSC is doing. But then the vendor stories, and so bridging Mike's realm, Mike's view, but then back to what Frank was saying, is how do we, one, get these stories out so that the vendors know that these features exist, hopefully get more involved in the roadmap and the actual TSC, but then also tell the story of how they're needing these features, or these features are important, or they're eventually supporting these features. Does mutual TLS matter to them? Actually being vocal about, and then signaling and flagging and saying, and then actually representing their webhooks, and then signaling and telling a story. Hey, we support webhooks, and here they're described with OpenAPI. So it's kind of a two-sided storytelling art, or need here, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. Back to you.
Definitely, I think to encourage people, well, we need content on the OpenAPI blog, I think, and we need to get people used to seeing that as somewhere where they want to go and find content and information and updates and explanations of what these features are and why they should use them, why they're important, why they should press their tooling vendors to support the new version. Also, I think we can do better with the Twitter feed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit sporadic. It sort of comes and goes, and its voice isn't 100% clear as to what its intention is, I don't think. Is it there to amplify in the same way as you were doing with the OAI demand gen originally? Or is it there to be the authoritative voice of everything OpenAPI, best practices, highlighting blog posts, highlighting tool vendors who have got new releases supporting new versions? So I think there's lots of ways we can do better. A lot of it comes down to time, because it's all volunteer basis. Yeah. So it's making best use of the limited time we have and coordinating people's efforts.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the reasons why we're looking at the additional paid resources, because Neil's, I would say, been great in helping support what's going on. I think if we could add to that, it would make your time and the volunteer times much more effective for the short amount that we have you. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, the storytelling piece, Mark. So I'd love to figure out. This was kind of, I'm somewhat getting fragmented in what the originally this group, was started for. Originally, it was just to purely amplify what's coming out of the OAI, and based upon discussions, we've got this whole buffet of projects now, and it's been good. It's definitely, I think, got us really focusing what's some of the core issues. But, as API evangelist, putting on my API evangelist hat, it's like this all comes back to just a lack of storytelling. Is like most of what needs to happen is everybody at the table, or everyone with skin in the OpenAPI or API specifications game needs to be a good citizen in telling the story of their role and what they're doing in the space. The problem is I suffer from this, is we have our day-to-day jobs and we get bogged down, and we don't have the time to write all the stories that we need, that we're obligated or we should be telling. So how do we incentivize that? How do we reward that behavior? How do we help focus and stabilize it from an OAI, but how do we also do that from a community? And we've talked service providers in this. I've got golden conversations right now going on with GitHub, Twitter, Twilio, Dropbox, Slack. Basically the API royalty, all using OpenAPI now, adopting OpenAPI and struggling with it in their own ways. Oh, I'll add Salesforce into that. They're all adopting OpenAPI officially now and using it in some way. And there is no feedback loop beyond me just talking to these people, to the TSC or to the community, saying, here's how we're using it, here's the problems that we've encountered, here's the challenges, here's the features that we're using. And I just can't be that conduit. I drop the ball constantly. So how do we enable that storytelling? So there's core spec storytelling, there's service provider storytelling, and there's provider implementer storytelling. And I think that's all gotta happen in a coherent way that we can measure and use as part of the signaling that you're talking about, Mark. Yeah, good stuff, man. So much to be done.
There's some stuff that straight off so I can go back through our OAS data collection in some of our areas and at least have some of that. So for example, if MTLS has been added to 3.1, we could get a list of like we know 70% of banks are using OAS. Then out of those 70% of banks, how many are using MTLS already, and sort of thing. I mean, if that's useful to you, we can get that sort of data, those data points to start with. And then even a list of, okay, who are those banks and fintech that use both of those?
I think that information would be tremendously useful. And what you were saying earlier about people using OpenAPI, do they have increased velocity of development? Are they getting more features out to their consumers? Are they publishing their APIs faster, more accurately? Is they getting better adoption? If we can measure the use of OpenAPI, we've got much more fuel for our storytelling and to making that storytelling actionable. So we're not just saying, we're not just waffling on about a release in isolation or a new feature that you might find useful, you might not find useful. But really getting out there and saying, you can do this with the new version of OpenAPI. We want the gateway providers to sort of come together into a working group to get their extensions into a place where they're interoperable, maybe, and then later we can fold them into the spec itself. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but.
So I want to touch on showcase one thing. It's not quite ready yet. That's come out of this for me is back to our working toolboxes. Out of all of these discussions, I've been labeling and organizing things and then trying to move some of these balls forward. And some of them, the balls that I'm moving forward got individual repos, so some of the biggest projects were, hey, we need to start showcasing who the service providers are. Hey, we need to know who the tooling are. Start a list of people. Extensions, what are the extensions out there? Overlays. What are the other specifications? Taxonomy questions were two things. And so I haven't had much traction in getting, very little traction getting other folks helping and contributing to this, because I would say, one, it's not visible. Like, you look at this isn't, I can't see these things here. And then I did try to pull together, and I've showed this before, where I have, so I, have taken the tools and actually launched a directory. And I know Mike has a pretty robust directory in a similar sense. I'm going beyond just OpenAPI, and I've harvested tools across all of these areas. But again, the problem is getting people contributing, helping curate this. And admittedly, it's too much information. I mean, you click into any of these areas, and there's just a lot. There's a lot to think about, and it's not cleaned up. It's not organized. So one of the things that I've been working on over the holidays was is trying to come up with a toolbox, a more visual toolbox, and not just in each of these areas. So I think a lot of us is focused on a tooling listing. Mike has a great one. Phil's got a great one, and that's one layer of it. What I want to borrow and augment those, and then cite and reference those as I'm looking at tooling, and same for services. But I really feel like we've got to start connecting the dots when it comes to the storytelling, the news that happens in these areas. So this gets to what we're talking about with providers and service providers actually talking about their open source tool. How does Redoc use what they do? How does README.io or Stoplight or Postman handle their documentation? And so I've set this up. This runs on GitHub. I'm going to keep working it. It's so the first is like, here's the specifications. So API blueprint, API's JSON. I got Avro Thrift. So really trying to help educate people about what are the core specs that are in play as part of the OpenAPI community. And then the second is extending those. So I'm still playing and finding the right way of aggregating and organizing the actual extensions. And Mike also has some listings. We've shared, cross-referenced several of these. I'm gonna keep organizing them here. I've just got a handful of Appomattox and AWS's right now as I'm formulating how I organize this and what's the approach here. And then I have news, so this is aggregate news, and then I have the service providers. Yeah, not very fast, is it? I have service providers, and I have tools, and so here's service providers, and then I started, and I'm still again playing with the information architecture on this. Here's all the the industry or sector specific specifications that I've come across, and I'll keep aggregating them here. And then what I have, I just had video. So I'm trying to get, there's a lot of great video content across API Specification Conference, API Days, Async API Conference. So I've started aggregating the videos. Now, why I feel this is valuable in aggregate is it makes it more visual, more tangible. Obviously, groups can come here and find what they're looking for, or find interesting things in all these areas. But really, I'm trying to get this tagging. This is what I'm working on now. Is when I click on documentation, I see services, and then I should see tools, and I should see vendor extensions. I should see anything that is documentation focused across. So it's these cross sections that I'm looking for here. How do I start seeing these? And then this all runs on GitHub 100%. So anybody can contribute to this story. The news here, anybody can contribute to all these. They're just YAML on GitHub. And so my goal is try to get this stood up and get myself contributing it to each week out of these discussions, so that everything here in the toolbox that we talk about just doesn't stay on GitHub. It becomes more tangible in this way. But then we can start having conversations more about extensions, and we can just have conversations about gateway extensions. So let's look at who the gateway providers are. I don't have extensions on there yet, but you get my point, that basically it's that cross-referencing that I'm trying to figure out, and how do we get the service providers, the API providers, to step up and contribute to this overall storytelling pool. So anyways, that's one of my holiday projects I worked on. I'll probably get it done in the next week or two, and then just open it up in a kind of beta fashion. I still got to harvest a lot of your work, Mike, and then get it woven in there. Phil's got a lot of great work. And so, but really what I'm trying to get is A, make it tangible, B, jumpstart the cross-referencing of this, so I can look at just authentication, specs, extensions, news, services, and tools, but also get the community to step up and come up with some sort of incentive. And going back to the original OAI demand gen kind of roots of this talk is how do we incentivize service providers to publish their news here, or automate it if I can automate it. How do we get service providers to publish their extensions in a way that we can then harvest those extensions? Because Appomatic has a really good page listing, AWS has a good page listing, but what is the actual schema behind this listing, so that we're able to aggregate and filter and use this at when it comes to the roadmap? And so I would say create a feedback loop, is like turn the toolbox into a more community-driven feedback loop if I can. So anyways, love to hear your feedback. This is, I think I added it to so it's just here in the API specification toolbox. Here's our home repo. This is just the toolbox repo. Here's the list of extensions that I have so far. This is, the presentation layer of the toolbox is separated from the data layer. So here's, AWS's API gateway, any method object. You gotta look at the raw. But basically it's, here's that entry. Here's their actual example extension. Here's a description of that extension. Here's the actual property of that extension. Here's the tag where it applies. So I'm working on how we automate, the adding and the aggregating of this, but eventually I would like it if folks would add their own, and so when it comes to services, it's all the same, similar format. So here's 3-scale, here's the raw, and so here's 3-scale's profile. So my goal is to try to get other folks contributing to it, but
yeah, I had a quick look at this the other day. I think when you tweeted it or when you updated the link on the README.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in getting a kind of one-stop shop set up. I think one thing I think is maybe missing is a little bit of storytelling about how you expect people to use this kind of site.
Yeah, working on that next. Because I don't know at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I think one thing we really can do, or aim to do, is to eat our own dog food a little bit more in this industry. I think getting people to contribute is fine. I think it's brilliant. And I think updating GitHub repos with YAML front matter as a data source is great up to a point. But I think what we need to do is integrate APIs into this one-stop shop. And I think we need to be pulling data from sources that already have an API.
Yeah.
For instance, as you mentioned, I've got a list of OpenAPI tooling. That list itself has an API. So you could pull that data and it would keep itself up to date automatically.
Yeah.
Because it's generated via GitHub topic tags.
Yep.
And we could extend that for async API and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I think you really get at the core. This has to be API driven. It can't be human driven.
I think it's not really sustainable in terms of time or depth if it's not driven by data sources. And I think with things like extensions, if we can get behind Ted Epstein's Samosa proposal for a machine readable format for extensions and get the vendors to commit to publishing machine readable definitions of their extensions, including a schema object.
Yeah.
So you can actually validate that an extension is correct before you add it to your OpenAPI document. And that could drive then all of your extension section of this API Toolbox.
Yeah, exactly what I'm looking for. I did not know about that. Ted had that. It's great to hear.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so that's kind of my goal, to try to make this conversation more tangible, visible. You really touched on, I do want to figure out how to automate and then incentivize people. I want to eventually have leaderboards, for storytelling. Oh, I lost my screen, but leaderboards for who's telling the most stories here, and how to float that up and reward and incentivize if I can ever get back to the site. So contributors, and figure out a reward system to incentivize it. But ultimately, I want people posting to their own blogs, to their own Twitter accounts, to their own GitHubs, and then using those APIs to then aggregate from there. They shouldn't even have to submit to this. So.
Yeah, aggregate and syndicate things like blog postings, videos. We've got the APIs out there. We just need to prove they work and they're useful by trying to use them in our own ecosystem.
Yeah. So anyways, welcome Mark, welcome Mike. Thank you guys for being here. Let's try to, I would love your help to try to keep Fridays people thinking about specs. Like, this is the day that you can kind of recoup from your week and gather your thoughts on specs. Join this conversation. I'm going to keep trying to get, like the OAI marketing. I want to get more people in a marketing mindset. Maybe we have a 10 a.m. wider marketing that then can feed into the OAI marketing. I want to do the 6 a.m., 7 a.m. So keep helping me try to formalize and keep joining and bringing discussions, and let's keep having them, see what we can do. With that said, I've got a 9 o'clock I've got to prepare for a keynote for Galaxy in February, so non-specifications, but work and duty calls, so I got to drop. But good to see y'all. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Be part of this.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Have a good one.